I wanted to turn around and walk out. I wanted to pretend the taxi was still idling at the curb, that I'd forgotten something at home in Muskoka. Anything to escape the weight of 300 eyes turning toward me at the same time. The voice that cut across the ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York belonged to my son's fiancée. She didn't whisper it. She didn't even lower her champagne flute. She said it loud enough for the string quartet to falter. "Oh, look. Everyone." The Stinky Lumberjack from up north finally decided to show up. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd, like wind over a lake. Some of her friends covered their mouths. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, didn't even try to hide his grin. He just raised his glass in a mock toast and turned back to the banker he'd been charming. I stood there in my pressed gray suit, the one my late wife Eleanor had picked out for our 30th anniversary dinner 8 years ago. I'd had it dry cleaned twice that week. My shoes were polished. My white hair was combed. I hadn't come down from the bush country smelling of pine pitch and diesel. I'd come down looking like a man who wanted to meet his future daughter-in-law's family with respect. And still, to Vivian Whitmore, I was the Stinky Lumberjack. My throat tightened. My hand, without my permission, reached for the door handle behind me. That's when my son Daniel appeared at my elbow. He was quick for a big man. Moved like his mother used to. Soft on his feet. He took my wrist. Not hard, but firm. And leaned close to my ear. His breath smelled like the peppermint he'd chewed on the drive, and, "Dad, don't you dare leave. Sit down. Smile. And trust me, I've been waiting for tonight for 8 months. She just walked into it. 8 months. My son, a 31-year-old hydrogeologist with 2 degrees from the University of Toronto, had been waiting 8 months for something. And whatever it was, it had just arrived, packaged up with a pearl necklace and a sneer. I let him lead me to our table near the back. I sat down. I smiled at the woman across from me, who turned out to be Vivian's aunt from Oakville, and who had the decency to look embarrassed on her niece's behalf. I want to tell you how I got here. How a 63-year-old widower who runs a tree farm in a small sawmill outside of Huntsville, Ontario, ended up in a downtown Toronto ballroom being publicly humiliated by the woman his only son was about to marry. It starts, I suppose, with Eleanor Margaret Whitfield, born in Sudbury, died on the 3rd of November, 6 years ago, from an ovarian cancer that she fought for 19 months with more grace than I will ever possess. She was the love of my life. We built the farm together starting in 1988 when my father passed it down. 640 acres of mixed bush. A sugar shack. She ran every March. A small mill I operated. And a cedar log farmhouse we raised 2 kids in. Our daughter Claire is an emergency room physician in Halifax. She's married to a wonderful man. Has 2 girls. Calls me every Sunday at 7 sharp Atlantic time. She wanted to come to the engagement party, but she was on call and couldn't swing the flight. Our son Daniel stayed closer. After his master's at U of T, he took a job with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, doing groundwater assessments. And he drives up to the farm most weekends. He handles the business side of the operation now. The sugar bush sales, the cedar shakes, who we ship to builders across southern Ontario. I'm still strong enough to work the land, but I'll admit the paperwork exhausts me more than it used to. 2 years ago, Daniel met Vivian at a charity gala in Toronto. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, owns a commercial real estate development firm in the GTA, the kind of company that's been buying up lakefront land in Muskoka for the last decade and flipping it into luxury cottage compounds. Vivian worked in her father's marketing department, though as far as I could tell her main job was being photographed at fundraisers in dresses that cost more than my pickup. I met her for the first time at Thanksgiving, the year before last. Daniel brought her up to the farm. She wore white jeans to a working tree farm in October. She wouldn't touch the maple butter I'd made. She asked, in front of me, whether the farmhouse had actual plumbing or just the You know, the rustic thing. When I showed her Eleanor's greenhouse, she said, "Oh, how quaint. My mother has one of those at our cottage in Port Carling, but hers is glass." I didn't say anything. Daniel squeezed my shoulder as we walked back to the house. I thought, well, young love makes people do strange things. Maybe she's just nervous. Maybe she'll grow into the family. I was wrong about one of those, and I was very, very wrong about the other. The problems started small. Christmas at her parents' Forest Hill mansion, where I was seated at what Vivian called the casual table in the pantry, while the grown-ups dined in the formal room. Easter, where Gerald spent the entire meal asking me, in that lazy drawl rich men use when they think they're being clever, exactly how much my farm was worth, who would inherit it, whether I had proper estate planning in place. I deflected. Eleanor and I had set up a family trust years ago. Our lawyer in Bracebridge, Douglas McIntyre, had made sure the farm was protected, that both kids had equal stakes, that no outside party, no spouse, no business partner, nobody could ever force a sale of that land without the unanimous consent of the trust's beneficiaries and trustees. I didn't tell Gerald any of that. I just said, "We've made arrangements." He didn't like that answer. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't used to being told no, even indirectly. Then Daniel proposed to Vivian last March, up at the farm, in Eleanor's greenhouse. He told me he'd thought about doing it in the city, but he wanted it to be somewhere that meant something to him. Vivian said yes. She posted a video to Instagram that got picked up by some Toronto lifestyle blog. The caption said, "He proposed in the most adorable little backwoods greenhouse." So vintage, she used 3 different hashtags for authenticity. The engagement party was set for 6 months later. A lavish affair at the Royal York that Gerald insisted on paying for, though Vivian made sure to tell everyone she met that she'd designed every detail herself. And that brings us back to the ballroom, to the lumberjack comment, to Daniel's grip on my wrist, and the words that changed everything. I've been waiting for tonight for 8 months. After the speeches, after Gerald gave a toast that managed to praise his daughter's refined Toronto sensibilities, while making 3 separate jokes about my son being rescued from a life of trees and cows, Daniel pulled me out onto the terrace overlooking Front Street. The November air was sharp and clean, and it felt like the first real breath I'd taken all night. "Dad," he said, "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to trust me completely for the next 2 weeks. Can you do that?" I looked at him. My son, he had Eleanor's dark eyes and my father's stubborn jaw. He had never in his 31 years asked me for anything like this. "Tell me what's going on." "I can't. Not yet. Not because I don't want to, but because if I tell you now, you'll look at her differently tomorrow at brunch. And she'll see it. She'll sense it. I've worked too long to risk that. I just need you to come to every dinner, every lunch, every family event from now until the wedding. Smile. Be polite. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're exactly what she said tonight. A stinky lumberjack. The wedding is in 3 months. I know. Daniel. What have you found out?" He was quiet for a moment. A streetcar rattled past below us on Front Street. "I'll tell you this much," he finally said. "She's not marrying me for me. And her father isn't giving her a wedding for love. There's a plan. Dad. A real plan. They've been working on it since before we got engaged. And the only reason I know is because she made one mistake about 8 months ago. And she still doesn't know I caught it. I wanted to press him. I wanted to demand answers. But I saw something in my son's face that I hadn't seen since the day his mother died. A kind of controlled fury. Cold and patient. And I realized that whatever was happening, my son had already thought it through far more carefully than I could in a single conversation on a cold Toronto terrace. "I trust you," I told him. "Tell me what to do. Be the lumberjack." "Dad," Be everything she thinks you are. It'll be over soon. So, that's what I did. For the next 12 weeks, I played a part at the bridal shower brunch at the Whitmore home in Forest Hill. I showed up in a flannel shirt and work boots. I stumbled over Vivian's mother's name 3 times on purpose. When Gerald asked me about the farm's annual revenue, I mumbled something vague about doing all right, I guess, and watched him exchange a small, satisfied nod with his daughter. At the rehearsal dinner at a French restaurant in Yorkville, I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a bowl of onion soup, and asked the server 3 times whether the bread was free. Vivian's friends, a cluster of women who all seemed to work in marketing or wellness or both, tittered behind their menus. Vivian herself leaned over to her maid of honor and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Honestly, I don't even think he owns a suit that fits. It's embarrassing." I let it happen. Every weekend, Daniel came up to the farm. We'd sit in the kitchen after supper, the wood stove popping, Eleanor's old wall clock ticking, and he'd show me things on his laptop. Documents, emails, photographs, transcripts. Let me tell you what my son had found. 8 months before the engagement party, Vivian had sent an email to her father from her personal account to his. It was about 2 sentences long, sent at 3 in the morning. Clearly drafted in a moment of frustration after a fight with Daniel. She'd forwarded him an attachment, a rough draft of a document her father's real estate firm had been preparing, and in the body of the email she'd written, "Dad, Fine, you were right. Let's do this properly. But I wanted in writing that I get the Port Carling cottage back as my share." Danielle, who was on her phone's shared iCloud account because they'd set up a family plan months earlier, saw the email notification pop up on his iPad one morning while she was in the shower. He took a screenshot, then another, then he opened her laptop, which was still unlocked, and he found everything. The attachment was a proposal, a business plan. Essentially, with Gerald's firm as the primary developer, it laid out, in stomach-turning detail, how the target property, my farm, could be rezoned from agricultural to mixed recreational residential use under a specific Ontario provincial development scheme that was currently in consultation. The plan assumed, and this is the word they used, assumed marital acquisition and subsequent forced partition under family law provisions within 18 to 36 months of union. In plain English, their plan was this. Vivian would marry Daniel. They would live mostly at the farm, establishing it as a matrimonial home. Then, within 18 to 36 months, Vivian would file for divorce. Under Ontario family law, the matrimonial home is subject to equalization even if one spouse owned it before marriage. And with the right legal team, Gerald's firm believed they could force either a buyout at market rate or, better still, a forced sale and partition of the property. The farm, my father's farm, Eleanor's farm, our children's inheritance, would be cut up and sold to Gerald's firm at a distressed family asset price. They'd estimated the project's gross development value at just over $42 million. Vivian's share, under the agreement she'd extracted from her father, would be the Port Carling cottage. Free and clear, plus a $2 million personal payout. My son had sat across from the woman he was supposed to love every day for 8 months and pretended he didn't know. The reason he did it, he told me one night in the kitchen, the wood stove glowing orange between us, was that a screenshot and a forwarded email weren't enough. Not for what he wanted to do. "Dad, I could confront her tomorrow. I could call off the wedding. But all that does is make us look paranoid and them look wrong. They'd deny it. They'd say I hacked her accounts. They'd make you look like the bitter father-in-law who poisoned my mind. And they'd still come after the farm someday. Through another mark. Another scheme. I don't want to dodge them. I want to end them." So for 8 months, he'd gathered everything. He'd recorded with his phone in his breast pocket. A dozen conversations with Gerald where the old man let slip specific details about the Huntsville project and the long game on the Lumberjack. He'd saved emails that Vivian had been careless enough to leave open on shared devices. He'd hired a retired RCMP officer, a friend of his old university roommate's father, to look into Gerald Whitmore's business history, and found a pattern. 2 previous projects where Gerald's firm had acquired lakefront properties through what appeared to be orchestrated marriages between his nieces and elderly landowners' sons. One of the properties was now a luxury resort outside Bala. The other was a subdivision north of Gravenhurst. This wasn't Vivian's first rodeo. It was her first at bat. But it was the family's 3rd major play. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel sat down with Douglas McIntyre, our family lawyer, and another lawyer he'd been quietly retaining in Toronto, a woman named Priya Bandari, who specialized in family law and fraud. Together they prepared a package that, Daniel told me, would be opened at the wedding reception. The morning of the wedding was cold and clear. The ceremony was at a historic stone chapel in Rosedale. The reception at Casa Loma. Gerald had spared no expense. There were 180 guests. There was a 12-piece orchestra. There was an ice sculpture of a swan that Vivian kept taking selfies in front of during the cocktail hour. I wore Eleanor's suit again. I stood at the altar as Daniel's witness. I smiled when the minister asked if anyone objected, and, as instructed by my son, I said nothing. The reception began. The first dances were danced. The salad course was cleared, and then, between the main course and dessert, Daniel stood up and tapped his champagne flute with his fork. The room quieted. Vivian, flushed with wine and victory, beamed up at him. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My son began. I want to especially thank my new father-in-law, Gerald, for his incredible generosity in putting together this celebration, and I want to thank my wife, Vivian, for being exactly the woman I knew she was. There was a polite ripple of applause. Vivian laughed, a little uncertain. Before we cut the cake, I have a gift for the family. For all of the family, my father, my sister Claire, who flew in from Halifax this morning, my in-laws, and my wife. It's a small thing, but I've been working on it for a long time. He nodded to a young man at the back of the room, a junior associate from Priya Bandari's firm. The associate wheeled in a small cart with 3 boxes, each containing thick binders and sealed envelopes. Every guest at the head table is going to receive one of these, Daniel said, his voice still warm, still celebratory. Please, take a moment to open it. Gerald's smile had become rigid. Vivian was no longer laughing. The envelopes were handed out. Inside each was a 1-page summary, printed on Priya Bandari's letterhead. It laid out, in calm, numbered bullet points, the existence of a fraud investigation currently being filed with the Ontario Provincial Police, the Canada Revenue Agency, and the Law Society of Ontario. It named Gerald Whitmore as the subject of a pending civil suit for conspiracy to commit fraud against my family trust. It named Vivian Whitmore as a co-conspirator. It referenced, by date and recipient, the emails, the recordings, the previous 2 family properties acquired through similar schemes. It also noted that a prenuptial agreement, which Vivian had signed 3 weeks earlier, after Daniel insisted it was just a formality his dad wanted, contained a clause voiding the marriage in the event of demonstrable fraudulent inducement, and that Priya Bandari would be filing for annulment first thing Monday morning. The room was silent. The orchestra had stopped playing without anyone telling them to. Vivian's face went white, then red, then white again. She turned to Daniel. Her mouth opened and closed. Daniel. What? This is. What are you doing? My son looked at her with the same calm, cold patience he'd carried for 8 months. I'm giving you what you gave me, he said quietly. A performance. I hope you enjoyed yours, because this is the last one you'll ever give in this family. Gerald stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. You can't. This is. You have no idea what you've started. I have lawyers who will destroy you. Daniel nodded pleasantly. You have lawyers. I'm counting on that. They'll have plenty to read on Monday. And by the way, Gerald, the Bala property and the Gravenhurst subdivision, both of those families have also been contacted. They're very interested in comparing notes. The old man sat down slowly. He looked, for the first time since I'd met him, like an old man. Vivian was crying now, great angry tears that smeared her makeup. You tricked me the whole time, and my son, my beautiful, patient, son, leaned down toward her and said, loud enough for the microphone on the head table to pick it up and carry it out to every guest in Casa Loma, no. Vivian, I just waited. There's a difference. I stood up then. I hadn't planned to, but something in me, something that had been clenched tight for 8 months, let go. I walked around the head table. I put my hand on my son's shoulder, and I looked at Gerald Whitmore, who had called me a lumberjack in 6 different ways across 36 family dinners, and I said the only thing I'd been waiting to say, the farm isn't for sale. Gerald, it never was, and it never will be. Then Daniel and I walked out of Casa Loma together, into the cold, clear February night, and we drove north. We didn't stop until we crossed the Severn River into Muskoka, and the stars came out thick overhead, the way they only do when you're far enough from the city. The annulment came through 6 weeks later. The criminal fraud investigation is ongoing, and Priya tells us the case against Gerald is strong, particularly given the pattern from the previous 2 properties. The families from Bala and Gravenhurst have both joined a civil suit. Gerald's firm has already lost 2 major municipal contracts. His name is quietly being removed from several charitable boards. Vivian moved to Vancouver. I hear she married an orthodontist within a year. I wish her nothing at all, which is more mercy than she showed my son. Claire flew home for Easter and stayed a week. My granddaughters ran wild in Eleanor's greenhouse and picked the first asparagus shoots, and the younger one, Mira, who is 6, asked me if Grandma Eleanor was a ghost in the house. And I told her, honestly, that I thought she was, but a good one. And she nodded as if that made perfect sense. Daniel is living at the farm now. He met a woman this summer, a veterinarian from Bracebridge named Heather, who wears Carhartts and laughs easily, and who brought me a jar of her own maple butter the first time she came to dinner. He hasn't proposed yet. I don't think he's in a hurry. He told me, a few weeks ago as we were splitting wood for the winter stack, that he wants to be very sure, this time, very, very sure. I don't say much when he says things like that. I just nod. I keep swinging them all. The wood piles up between us. Good clean birch and maple. Enough to last the season and then some. Here's what I've learned. And here's what I wanted to tell you tonight. When someone shows you who they are, the first time, in a small way, in a throwaway comment about your greenhouse, or your plumbing, or the smell of your clothes, pay attention. Most of us don't. Most of us make excuses. Call it nerves. Call it a bad day. Call it the stress of meeting the family. But the first crack shows the true shape of the stone. My son was smarter than I was. He saw the crack early, and instead of running from it or denying it, he stood still and watched it grow. And when the whole thing finally split open, he was ready. I spent 63 years being a simple man. A farmer, a husband, a father. I never had much use for strategy. Eleanor and I just tried to be honest and work hard and raise our kids to do the same. But sometimes the world sends you people who read honesty as weakness, and hard work as stupidity, and love as leverage. And when those people come, you don't have to become like them. You just have to be patient enough to let them show you, in writing, in their own words, exactly who they are. Then you hand them the bill. My farm is still standing. 640 acres of bush. One sugar shack. One small mill. One old cedar log farmhouse. And one greenhouse where my wife's hands still seem to linger in the soil if I stand quiet enough in the morning light. It will go to my children when I'm gone, and to their children after that, and it will not be sold. Not piece by piece. Not all at once. Not ever. By any man in a Forest Hills suit who thinks a white-haired widower in a pressed gray suit is just a stinky lumberjack from up north. That's my story. Tonight, before you close your eyes, I want to ask you something. Somewhere. In your own life. Is there someone who has already shown you a small crack? A comment that didn't sit right? A joke that cut a little too clean? A moment when you told yourself you were imagining it? You weren't imagining it. Trust the crack. Watch it. Be patient. And when it splits open, we'll be ready to walk out of that room. Into the clean, cold night. With the people who love you by your side and the stars overhead thick enough to make you forget, for a little while, that anyone ever doubted where you came from. Good night from Muskoka. From a tree farm that will outlive me by 100 years. From one old man to another. From one old woman to another. From anyone who ever walked into a room and heard their name turned into a joke. You are not the punchline. You are the patient one. And your night, like mine, is still to come.